This week on Act Out, the war machine is now branching out into early childhood education, Koch's bogus greenwashing, and how corporations use courts to slap down their opponents. Next, serving, caring, and protecting are all words that authorities use, but do not know what they mean. As human rights violations and environmental abuses flourish, their mottos continue to fall fascistically flat. And finally, Jay from Three Sisters Camp joins us to talk about the camp's resistance to the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. A Norwich flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Many of you know Lockheed Martin as the big-time arms manufacturer, the dealer of death worldwide, but mostly right now in the Middle East, since, that's where we've really hungered down like a diseased tick. What you probably didn't know is that Lockheed Martin has branched out. They were feeling a bit bored with the monotonous slog of murdering tens of thousands on our capitalist crusades, and now, well, they want to share that experience in the classroom. Skipping right over Career Day, Lockheed Martin is opening a one-of-a-kind preschool for immigrant kids in Jerusalem, minus Arabs, of course, that will provide preschool and kindergarten students with computers and other state-of-the-art technology in an effort to, quote, foster and boost advanced technology. Is anyone else imagining these kids on preschool graduation day with fucking anti-aircraft missiles? And as grotesque as this is, it is not new. Lockheed Martin is the biggest weapons manufacturer in the world, and it's had a cozy relationship with Israel for quite some time. Between 2010 and 2017, Lockheed Martin invested more than $1 billion in Israel via what's known as reciprocal procurement, which is a nice name for business deals. Israel signed on to buy Lockheed Martin's shit piles of metal, known as the F-35s, while looping in Israeli companies for special parts manufacturing. One such deal was with Israeli company Elbit Systems for specially designed F-35 helmets that would then be sold to every country that buys an F-35. To say that Lockheed and Israel are cozy would be an understatement. So then it's really not surprising that they're looking to indoctrinate the next generation in the name of bottom lines and ruined lives. Indeed, they've already instituted educational programs for older students in Israel, including Lego competitions and cyber summer camps in partnership with the Israel Defense Forces Cyber Command. The largest weapons manufacturer in the world and the fucking IDF are teaching computer courses. But wait, it gets worse. If you're thinking, wow, that really sucks, but at least it's not an American problem. Ha! The US is ground zero for war machine education. On their website, under the heading of Impacting Education, and I can only assume they're not talking about the literal bombing of schools, on their own website, Lockheed exclaims, advancing science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM education, is a critical focus for Lockheed Martin. We know firsthand the importance of educating our young people in these areas. Our future success and our nation's technological advantage depend on a constant supply of highly trained, highly capable technical talent. Read, we recognize how important it is to indoctrinate the next generation so as to create dutiful, unthinking proles that enjoy working with blood on their hands, thus perpetuating the war machine's murder-for-profit business model. But yeah, I agree. Their copy sounds nicer. Lockheed has dozens of programs all across the education spectrum, focusing in no small part on what they call underrepresented youth. Yeah, if the economic draft doesn't get you killing people directly, you can indirectly kill people by getting a job making weapons. They've also partnered with organizations like National Geographic, yes, Nat Geo, to sponsor classroom content, and they pride themselves on their many philanthropic endeavors within education. No. You can't fucking be philanthropic if your business model is built on killing people. That's just how logic works. So, look out for these programs and be aware of new ones popping up, because You may think that sending your kid to a computer camp is benign enough, but there is nothing benign about brainwashing kids for the purposes of death, destruction, and corporate profit. And speaking of corporate profit, our next headline has to do with Coca-Cola's promise that for every drop of water that they take, they put one back. This water replenishment goal was set for 2020, but in 2016, they announced that they had hit that target early, making them the first Fortune 500 company to do so. Woo! They even took out a full-page ad in the New York Times. And let me just take this moment to once again offer a resounding fuck you to the New York Times for being the dealers of those psychotic drugs known as bullshit and lies. Anyway, back to Coca-Cola. The reason for their interest in this campaign... The reason for their interest in this campaign to begin with stems from really bad press that they got in the mid-aughts for siphoning water from local sources in order to keep their costs low. So, in a large-scale greenwashing attempt, they announced that they'd become water neutral by 2020. Problem is, as The Verge notes in their coverage of the story, no one can agree on what the fuck water neutral actually means. This quintessential greenwashing term was coined by a businessman who claimed corporations could offset global water crises by purchasing credits that would then be invested in water access and water efficiency programs. Now, outside of the fact that asking corporations stealing our water to now save our water is kind of like asking the guy who stabbed you to drive you to the hospital, the Water Neutral Initiative never bothered to explain how corporations would calculate their water usage or screen these supposed programs that claim to give water back. But the nuts and bolts weren't really important. The image is what matters. So, as Coca-Cola found that their corporate supply chain was guzzling water that they would never dream of paying to replace or mitigate, some creative accounting was employed to ensure a clean image and corporate conscience. So here's the gist. There's 0.5 liters of water in a bottle of Coke. It takes 35 liters of water to produce a half-liter bottle of Coke. So in other words, when it refers to returning every drop, it's essentially referring only to the water that actually fits into each bottle or can of its beverages. According to a water footprint study, nearly 99% of its water use is left unaccounted for, possibly more, considering that not all of the company's offset projects actually return water to nature by the company's own admission. By their own admission. Meanwhile, Coke has partnered with, i.e. paid shit tons of money to, environmental groups that then go on to congratulate Coke on being water neutral. And then hippie-type millennials dance on beaches in their ads, making you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, thinking that Coke actually might give a flying fuck as to how many millions of people on this planet don't have access to clean water. But they don't. They only care about their bottom line. And it costs more to actually be better than to appear better. And that's just a good rule of thumb to consider whenever you see any corporation touting its environmental concern, especially since corporations are willing to sue people who expose their greenwashing for what it is. Strategic litigation against public participation, or SLAPP, is increasingly used by corporations against individuals or civil society organizations which have criticized or made public allegations against the corporation's actions, notably regarding allegations of environmental degradation or human rights abuses. And this plays out in a variety of different ways. For example, when Chevron sued the American lawyer who had won a several billion-dollar case against Chevron for their destruction of and irreparable pollution in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Without ever denying the fact that they, in fact, were guilty of that crime, Chevron constructed a bogus case of racketeering and won. Another similar case claims that environmental activists, in particular Greenpeace, made defamatory claims to fraudulently induce donations from the public in violation of the RICO, i.e. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizational Act. Yes, corporations are suing people for exposing their corruption under laws against corruption. I swear to fuck, you couldn't make this stuff up if you tried. Like when Energy Transfer Partners used the RICO Act to sue Greenpeace again for the group's work against the Dakota Access Pipeline. And outside of mere defamation, these cases often push for actual jail time. The recent update last week that the people who exposed a Turkey torture camp were charged with multiple felony counts is another example of this paradigm at work. And it goes even further. In 2013, the Special Rapporteur to the UN Human Rights Council noted in a report that she had observed the consolidation of more sophisticated forms of silencing defenders' voices and impeding their work, including the application of legal and administrative provisions or the misuse of the judicial system to criminalize and stigmatize their activities. These patterns not only endanger the physical integrity and undermine the work of human rights defenders, but also impose a climate of fear and send an intimidating message to society at large. Which, of course, is the point. If people are too afraid to speak out, corporations can destroy us and the planet in peace. Dissent threatens their bottom line, and not just dissent, but the building of alternatives. The knowledge that this doesn't have to be this way, that we can do better than the forced war, the forced poverty that creates a global graveyard in the name of some rich asshole's offshore bank account. And so corporations will use the courts and most certainly the authorities to protect their interests. Be it the people who exposed the Turkey Auschwitz or the folks down in Louisiana who were arrested by police for protesting the continued construction of the Bayou Bridge pipeline during a court-ordered work stoppage. The cops, however, opted to arrest these peaceful protesters rather than the construction workers illegally tearing up land for a fucking oil pipeline. And we saw that same mentality at play along the proposed route of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. On May 23rd, a protector occupying a monopod finally came down after 4 days without food. The Forest Service had set up a blockade and wasn't allowing any supplies up to the monopod, which is basically fucking torture. And I'll say that again, the Forest Service, you know, the agency whose actual motto is caring for the land and serving people. That is their motto. And yet they not only wouldn't allow ground support to serve people the essentials of survival, they're offering up that land that they care so much about to be raped and destroyed by a natural gas pipeline. Considering this particular brand of caring and serving, it's really no surprise that they also stood by when on May 25th, 2 days later, workers cut the branches of a tree that housed a tree sitter, injuring that person. Anybody caring or serving on that one? Anyone there to serve or protect? To be fair, maybe everyone was so busy prepping for a fake protest that they actually neglected to notice the human rights and environmental abuses happening in their backyards. Last Tuesday, almost 30 agencies across the Richmond, Virginia area trained for a civil unrest event. The scenario was realistic, but fictional. 2 opposing activist groups planned demonstrations, attracting thousands to Richmond's Capitol Square on the same day. One group is protesting the Mountain Valley Pipeline. The other group rallies in favor of the pipeline. So apparently, the idea for this staging popped up after the events in Charlottesville last year, where police stood by, I know this because I was there, as Nazis attacked counter-protesters and one woman was murdered by a white supremacist terrorist who drove a car into a crowd of people. And here's the thing. Even if they trained to actually stop Nazis or right-wingers or whoever from attacking people, they don't care about our safety. If they did, they would have stopped workers from injuring a tree sitter. They would have stopped the Forest Service from torturing an activist. They would have done any number of things to mitigate or put an end to any number of human rights violations and environmental abuses. But they didn't. And they don't, and they won't. The simple truth is that all they care about is maintaining order, and that order is the order of the state that perpetuates those very same human rights violations and environmental abuses. It is that order that allows Coca-Cola to siphon water from local communities, the order that allows courts to be used against those fighting for justice, the order that is built on capitalist chaos, on an ongoing spiral of crisis. And it is precisely this ordered chaos that those activists are fighting against. a microcosm example of the behemoth beast that we all must fight and build alternatives to in our own collaborative ways. And in a similar way to those standing and sitting in the path of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, folks have come together along the path of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, a fracked gas pipeline, at Three Sisters Resistance Camp. A while back, we spoke to pipeline resistor Jay about the ACP, the ongoing occupation, police harassment, and building connections beyond the pipeline.
So the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is a fracked gas pipeline that is set to run through much of West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina. It is the pet project of the mainly the two energy monopolies that exist in Virginia and North Carolina. So Dominion Energy here in Virginia and Duke Energy in North Carolina. So Three Sisters was brought from, basically we had some comrades in Buckingham County that saw Dominion workers on the specific piece of land that we are currently occupying. And Dominion had no legal right to be there. They hadn't yet taken this landowner to court. And so they were like, definitely on the land, like doing illegal surveying and like not according to any sort of like legal or regulatory guidelines that they were supposed to be following were not being followed. And so like in an effort to keep that from happening, Three Sisters Camp was born. A very humble beginnings. We started out with just a few tents, cooking over campfires, and it was very like roughing it in the woods. And we've since grown throughout the time that we've been on this land, trying to think about like the ways in which we want to defend it, and the ways in which we want to like also like build deep with like other folks that are within the movement, like thinking about just like the ways in which like pipeline resistance can like mean resistance to a lot of different like oppressive systems.
So are you in an area that is part of the pipeline path, or is this like an easement area, or describe a little bit about like what in relation to the pipeline path?
Yeah, so the way this specific piece of land looks is the center line of the pipeline would go directly through it. And it's also in like a really critical area. This is where Dominion wants to build their drill pad. So there's within a pipeline, like they want to drill underneath the James River using like a horizontal drill pad. And this piece of land is like where that area, like the only area that like they'd be able to do that on. And it, obviously like would ruin the water, would ruin the James, and all of the different ecosystems that like exist in that area. And it would also like, they plan on cutting down like the vast majority of the trees in like the forest that we are currently occupying as well.
And what has been has there been, any response from either pipeline workers or authorities since you've set up the camp there?
For sure. So I think that in the beginning, we had a lot more interface with the sheriffs, the local sheriffs, and pipeline private security and surveyors. They haven't really been coming around more recently. I think that they, like Dominion, in an effort to not create such like a stink around it or do a lot of their things behind closed doors, have been like staying off of the land. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we're there and we're there to hold them accountable for the ways in which like they do break the rules. So in that way, like we've been seeing that like the static encampment is like an effective tactic in defending the trees and in defending the water. Recently, we've had heavy like surveillance from helicopters, like low flying helicopters and low flying planes with like infrared technology, the ability to detect like how many people like are, in camp without like needing like actual people,
Right.
so that surveillance is very real. And like hearing drones, and helicopters and planes like does get to be like psychologically taxing, and it is something that like we do have to deal with, in
Sure.
terms of like direct like state interface. Like we have
Hmm.
had our people followed by Virginia State Police in the past. That's happened like several times.
And with regards to locals, have you run into any locals that have commented or shown any support or anger for what you guys are doing?
For sure. So it's actually really been, we've had a lot of support from the local community, specifically wanting to highlight the Union Hill community in Buckingham County, which is like where Dominion wants to build their compressor station for the pipeline. So the compressor station is like where the fracked gas would go to basically like get compressed so that it can go through the next portion of the pipeline. It is an extremely like dangerous bomb, basically,
Right.
that Dominion wants to build. And the Union Hill community, which is a community of freedmen, the descendants of like freed slaves, that has been there for many generations. It's a lot of like older Black folks there, and so this compressor station like is dangerously close to like a lot of their houses, in like a very beautiful and like scenic part of Buckingham County. Like all of Buckingham County is like beautiful. And so just thinking about like, when I was talking about like how pipeline fights can encompass like a lot of different like resistance to oppressive systems, like thinking through like what environmental racism is like manifesting itself as, like through the building of this project and Dominion's, lack of regard for this historical area, this area that like is very much like, anti-capitalist in its history,
Mm.
right? um and like what, its implications are, and like what it looks like for us to be able to like resist with these folks in Buckingham County, is very real, and they're like super supportive of us.
And with regards to the camp, there are different varieties of camp. There's the Standing Rock type situation where it's more of an
Mhm.
open door, and then there's,
Mhm.
like you mentioned, Lo La Vie, like in that there's a more strict process of people that
Mhm.
get accepted to camp. Are you asking people to come physically to camp, and if so, is there some sort of process, or are you asking people to support remotely?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, actually. We would love for folks to like roll through to camp. We would love it if you like sent us an email at Three Sisters Camp at protonmail.com. And we'd get back to folks. Like we do have a vetting process that we like to put folks through, like speaking to like Louis Lavie, that, is also something that like we're doing. And then if folks want to like send supplies, follow us on social media, like that's also like super helpful. Like share our fundraisers, so that
Mhm.
we can continue to like support folks that are like on the grounds and doing this work, is also super helpful. So yeah, I'd say it's like a bit of both.
Gotcha. And finally, like, and I know that especially especially in a camp setting, you definitely live one day at a time. But sort of looking
Yeah.
forward, what do you see? Like, do you have any ideas of the trajectory of how this might go? Like pipelines lose like a shit ton of money due to
Mhm.
delays. Do you have a feeling of and then of course if you feel like based on what you've already seen that there might be a threat of the camp being physically threatened by authorities.
Mhm. So I think that specifically for this project, it's really interesting. The way that, again, like things in the political sphere are manifesting themselves, like how much pressure is being put on, like from people that are on the ground. So there's like a lot of diversity of tactics that's happening. And then I read somewhere that Dominion is already like $1 billion over budget, for this pipeline project.
Hmm.
And it's already like a multi-billion-dollar project. And so I think that like we're going to, I do believe that we can win, honestly. I
Hmm.
also think that like it's going to take a diversity of tactics. And so it's just like you know, we are like on the ground, but we're constantly trying to like build with people and like bring people in and like figure out like what folks want to do, and how like, you know, we can like make folks feel powerful like in resistance. That can look a lot of different ways. I think it'll be emergent though. I think that in terms of like what happens like when camp is threatened, we're trying to you know, like I think we're just like our main priority is like keeping people safe.
So in closing, is there anything that you'd like to share that you've that not like necessarily like epiphanies or anything like that, but just something that you could share with people who might be fighting similar fights, or even just, you know, fights against an oppressive, racist, sexist system, like anything to throw out there from somebody who's on the ground, on the front lines like you are?
For sure. I think I would just say like try to find joy where you can, and like recognize that like, you know, resistance can look a lot of different ways. I think that like it's also, you know, important to like, yeah, remember to like build with people, like build like deep relationships, and like that, you know, you know, sometimes things can like feel really overwhelming, but like at the end of it all, like, you know, I do believe that liberation is possible, and I do believe that like we can like figure things out and like figure out how to be in right relation with each other and with this planet, and that we should just take it one day at a time.
For more information and details on how to help the Three Sisters Camp and their ongoing resistance, check out @3sisterscamp on Twitter, and find them on Facebook via typing in Three Sisters Resistance Camp. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please, as always, spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. And check out the last slide and the show description online to find sites mentioned in this week's show. And for interim updates, as well as posted videos, images, and articles, please visit us on social media. And to those who have donated to keep us going, thank you so much. Please do keep spreading the word in order to ensure our ability to keep acting out. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some roster through. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left for nothing, motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been begging up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and served my shove. I'm not a violent